Hi there, my name is Tanya, and we're doing a deep dive today with Tom Konkle, who created 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a new version. So, Tom, it's so good to see you again.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Tanya.
What drew you to taking on writing your own version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Well, it's funny. This was a sort of a natural extension of where I am right now creatively. I had done a movie. I had directed Vernon Wells in a movie called Trouble Is My Business, and we were talking about bucket list things. And during the pandemic, I started a thing called Radio Reborn, which is a audio fiction podcast that's available on all your audio platforms like, Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of that. It's hosted on Buzzsprout. And I started doing it initially started where I would do recreations of sort of classic radio shows just to learn about it, like learn the craft of it. How do we do it? And the pressure was off because I didn't have to write any scripts, and I would actually literally do it on Zoom real time. So the rehearsal stuff was there, and I had this guy Brian Errata would play keyboards literally live while we were doing it, and any sound effects happened in the room, and it was a real light way of getting something done and having fun with actor friends. But me being me, I decided to start doing original episodes that I would write. So I took it and springboarded off of that and created something called The Reasonably Amazing Adventures of Flash Gordon, which you were a part of. You actually played Dale Arden in a few episodes, and you were magnificent. And we had a lot of fun, but you'll notice it evolved.
Yes.
And I started recording people in the session, but then adding sound effects, music, and starting to edit to tighten it up because because I'm a filmmaker and because I'm an editor and stuff, I went, you can take this to the next level. Like I just started to challenge myself. And I did 10 of those, and then I started doing silly bits, that were original, but recording people individually. Like I would actually get them on Zoom and I would play all the other parts and direct them in their part and then cut my part out and then record somebody else playing all the other parts to them and then put it in. And it was a really interesting way to work because you could get very granular with it. You could take an original script and you could really work with somebody to get exactly the sort of line reads that you wanted, which is much more like creating almost an audio movie than it is radio where everybody's got the script and they just go. And that's fun. I even did it live. We did a live show version of it for Halloween where we did the Shadow and H.P. Lovecraft. But there is something that I like about the level of depth and immersion you could get. Well, fast forward, I had Vernon on the set of Trouble, and I remembered that he said his bucket list was to play Captain Nemo in
I was
20,000
just going to
Leagues.
ask you about that. I was
Yeah,
going to ask,
yeah,
all right, so
yeah.
how did Vernon Wells come to be attached with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and what drew him to playing Captain Nemo? So why is it a bucket list character for him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you heard his voice in this thing. I mean, isn't he genetically designed to play this
Oh
character?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
so
I mean, he's
good.
got that bassy, gravelly
Gravelly,
voice.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he played villains his whole life. He was Bennett in Commando, and he was Wes in Mad Max, and he was the villain in Inner Space and all this. But he always wanted to play Captain Nemo. He told me that years ago, and I filed it away because I've always wanted to do a version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but I didn't know how I could.
Mm.
So I had him dip his toe in doing Red Wind, which was a Philip Marlowe story, and he had a lot of fun playing with everybody. So when I felt ready, I said, "Okay, how do I how do I have something new to say about this?" You know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
know. Have you ever seen the Disney film from the 50s, the one with Kirk Douglas in it? Did you ever see
I
that?
admit that I have not. I
Okay.
have
So
not
that's
seen it.
that's considered the definitive telling of it, but it's not really close to the book at all, but it's a great, I love it. James Mason as Captain Nemo, and then Kirk Douglas as Ned Land, the harpooner, and then they had character actors. They had Pierre Lorre play Conseil, and I forget who played Professor Aronnax, which was my character, who was supposed to be a French character, but I think they just cast an American. But the point being, that was so definitive in my mind. And then there's all these other sort of versions of 20,000 Leagues, but it is a public domain thing. And since I
Right,
had
right.
played in public domain with like the Flash Gordon serial and Sherlock Holmes and all these other things, Scrooge, you remember
Yep.
I did that.
Scrooge, yes,
Those were
yes.
all sort of classics that you go, well, what's my take on it? So that was my entry point. And I think you'll agree, like when you listen to it, it is more of a character study and a fever dream.
Mm,
Don't you think? You see what
definitely.
I was going for, where
Yeah.
you're in his head, but you're also your entry point is through the professor, and it's almost like he's having this fever dream meeting Captain Nemo and falling under his spell and what a complicated character he is. And I thought, well, okay, this needs to be the most ambitious audio-wise I've ever done. And so
Mm.
that was my point of getting, once I knew Vernon really wanted to play this character, it motivated me because his birthday was December 31st. So,
Oh,
yeah, when I started it, I said, you know what? I'm going to finish it on his birthday. It'll be my gift to him. And he's been through hell recently. He lost his home in the
right.
fire. And I actually recorded this at his house. I was like one of the last people at his house. I recorded it in December, and the
Wow.
house is burned up in what, January 3rd. So
Uh,
yeah, we were over there and I worked with him almost like one-on-one like you would a play. Where
mm-hmm.
it's like, we're not going to do the usual bag of tricks here, Vernon. We're going to push you, we're going to come up. And he was up for the task. He was vulnerable and understood the layers, and he knew I had his back. Like if there was something where I was like, I don't think it works. I'm not just saying it, but I'm saying it
Yeah.
because I knew there was something even deeper or more interesting or some other level that he could find that he understood in Nemo. And when he trusted me for it, we got this really interesting performance out of him.
Yeah.
And that was the bedrock that I built everything else around because writing it, well, I have to tell you a story about writing it.
It's
It's kind of
probably
weird.
one of my questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It-
an entirely new story.
yeah,
Uh, but it's with characters that some audience members are already going to be familiar with because,
right,
like you mentioned, this is public domain, which means it's been
right.
around for at least 100 years. So
Yeah.
there have been people who've read it or seen the Disney movie or other adaptations that exist out there for that. So as a writer, director, actor, is it intimidating to take on work that your audience may already have a love for or an expectation of?
Yes, it is. Well, it can be intimidating, except in this case, I kind of let it go because I was a fan, but also I said, you know what? Um, I'm not going to be slavish to the source material. I'm going to do my impression of the novel. And one of the things about the novel is, being a 19th century novel, the novelty of it was you're in a submarine.
Yeah,
That was a big deal. There weren't submarines. There, the idea of being under the sea was alien. That was science fiction. And we take
yeah,
it for granted now because you can turn on, the Discovery Channel or something and see 24 hours under the sea and it's quite mundane. But back then, the novel, if you look at it narratively, it's tough because not only is it paced like a 19th century novel, but
right.
whole chapters will go by with no dialogue at all, no interaction. It is a travelogue of what Jules Verne imagined deep sea diving would be and what you would see. And he was
Right.
amazingly accurate about it, but translating that in a script, audio, it's
Yeah.
like there goes another fish. Oh, some coral, It's
Well,
like
yeah, I'm sure that
yeah,
he was really trying to paint,
evocative.
a picture, an environment for his
Yeah.
readers,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that it
You hit
makes
the, you hit the
sense.
nail on the head. That's the word, the environment. I was
Yeah.
like, how do I build environments and atmospheres in audio fiction? And
Ooh.
and and how do I create that? And I said, you know what? There's three major environments. One of them is the Nautilus. Like it's
Mm.
almost its own character. The sound of it, the engine. I had envisioned this as kind of It's originally misinterpreted as a sea monster, but it's this steampunk kind of. It was advanced, but it's also ornate. It probably has
Mm.
ivory and wood and brass, but it's a sub. Then you
Yeah.
have the surface world, and I was like, well, that needs to feel wet and cold or alien in its own way because he's more comfortable at sea. And
Hmm.
and I said, okay, so that's the other environment. And then really the third environment is either the Antarctic, where they get out in that harsh environment, because every other time they're either in the ocean, under the ocean, or walking by the ocean. So I was like, how do I make you feel wet and cold and immersed in it? And
The
so I
ocean's its
started thinking
own
about, yes,
character.
yeah. And so when I was writing it, I divided it up into my impression of the novel. And I didn't really go back to the novel beyond having read it and knowing what I didn't want to do, which was the movie or other things that I've seen where it's just the mechanics of it. And I said, what's my
Right.
entry point?
Mm.
And I started writing it, and I said, you know what? What's cool about it is because it's of that time, it lets me be more ornate in my language, which
Mm.
is a great, like, take the chains off because I love writing like that. There's no swearing in this, there's no thing. It's all what iambic pentameter was to Shakespeare, where you just said that's how these people talk. The ornate and flowery and higher than their station way that people talk, that
Hmm.
poetic way that they talk in a novel in the 19th century is perfect for me to write because I could have these profound statements that don't sound like, hitting over the head, trying to make my point. I can say, when you're underneath the sea, sometimes the darkness is not just beneath the waves, but within the man. And in
Mm.
the framing of it, of playing a French character, I'm playing a French professor and finding that voice, it sounds credible, and the audience gets it. You're like, ooh, it's evocative. I get it. I understand it. So, I had the flowery language that I enjoyed, the sort of fever dream that I wanted to do, and then I thought, well, how do I show, not tell, but have it be audio. And that really is where the sound effects came in. I wrote out what sound effects would come in. I wrote out what music would come in. I had a stylistic mood. Like for me, once you set the mood of something, it starts to write itself, and you're taking dictation from the characters, knowing where it's going. Because it was an existing property, I knew how it ended. Does that make sense? So in a
Yeah,
way,
for
you're writing
sure.
from the ending. When I write an original piece, I'll still map out everything and I kind of know how it ends, but I don't know if the ending works. In this, I knew the ending would work. It's worked for 150 years. So it's
Right,
like
right.
how I get there. And I said, this is an environmentalist who kills people to make his point. That is the irony of this character. He is his hubris and his arrogance that he is master of the sea and yet somehow claims that he is, bowing to nature and honoring nature, but he brings all that baggage from the surface world with him. And
Mm.
he's collecting things and still collecting coins and art that he finds on the bottom of the sea. It's like, where are you going to spend this? What are what are you going to do with the money there?
Yeah.
And he built his own little world.
Well, he's a preservationist,
Yeah,
was, yeah,
but
part of
preserving
it.
it in his own image.
Mm.
That was the interesting thing. And the Nautilus was his beast that he used to threaten people. And so I started writing that out, and I knew I wanted to, have the attack with the squid. I wanted to go here, and I know that he's attacked by another boat, and eventually he ends up in this vortex. And I didn't see a lot of stuff about the vortex, like they always have in the stories, like it's the vortex, and he gets swallowed up in it. And I went,
Yeah.
actually, they referred to a vortex in Norway at that time that I have a feeling Jules Verne was referring to. This is a very European centered book, which is why I'm doing an accent. And I had Dave Beeler do an accent as Ned Land. And I had Paul Eiding do Conceal, so he was also French, and my character
Hmm.
was French. And they must have gone or thought of Norway or that area, at least in my mind. So I started to think of the geography. Well, it's like he's down here in Antarctica, then he needs to go here. How do I bridge that with music and stuff? So the script started to write itself, and surprisingly, I got it done in a few weeks. Now,
I was
I
just going
had,
to ask you that too. I was like, so
yeah,
I mean, from because uh, Vernon had discussed that this was something that he wanted to do, and I'm sure that that idea was put out there. I mean, that could have been put out there months ago, possibly a
Yeah.
year ago. I'm not sure
Oh,
when that occurred.
oh, it was 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago.
Okay, all right. So,
Yeah.
but now you didn't start writing this. So what? So you decided at some point something kind of sparked this where you were like, I should do this and it should be for his birthday present.
Right. It literally was like that. Like towards the fall of last year, I said to myself, okay, what can I do creatively to close out the year that's doable,
Mm,
that I'm motivated to do, and that I feel like I'll learn something in doing it. And what I
mm,
mean by that was just every time I do this, this has so many tracks and so many moving parts in it, and I really wanted it to sound like a movie, that I
mm,
learned about so much more about myself doing it, like the tricks that you use and things like that. But also as a writer, it forced me to write in a different voice, a different style, like this sort of immersive thing of he's talking in his head, and then there's
hmm
conversations going on, and it was a character study of a dark character, and I knew who I was writing it for, so I could kind of hear his voice. So once that came together, the script flowed pretty well.
mm.
And the beauty of audio fiction is they don't have to memorize it. So I knew that the when you make a movie, there is a lot more coal you have to move to get to the diamond, is what I say. In other words, you have to have your script, and you get your budget, and then you get your sets, and then you get your costumes, and then people have to rehearse, and they have to memorize it and do it. This cuts that down a little bit. It gives me as a creator more control because I can build all the worlds, and in audio fiction you can say, look, an elephant, there'll be an
Right,
elephant,
right,
but
right,
but
right.
more importantly, I could call on the actors when they were available, and they didn't go, I need to memorize this,
Yeah,
it's an hour and 30 minutes long. So I was able to write it and then start really approaching people a week or two later. And as
fantastic.
long as I made them feel comfortable that they knew the text and they had read it, you could work pretty quickly. But yeah, that's a very long answer to how I wrote the adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out. In an unexpected way, it's available even as an adapted audiobook at Barnes and Noble. So it's like
That's
I have a writing
fantastic.
credit as Tom Konkle adapting in this new media, adapting 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, which, you know, that's kind of cool. And I didn't intend it, but it turned out in such a way that when they reviewed it, they were like, "This is a great adaptation. Do you want to sell it on, Barnes and Noble or I think even Canopy? Is that the place you can check it out from the library or something? I think it's called
Oh,
Canopy. Yeah,
it's oh, I should know this.
something.
It's on the tip of
Yeah,
my tongue because
yeah,
my husband listens to a lot of stuff from the library, actually.
yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
called Canopy, if I'm not mistaken, but I think it's on there as well. So, yes, I'm pretty sure it is.
Um, so what would be mundane for us now in the time period, obviously, that we're existing compared to when this was written?
Oh, when this was written. Yeah, well, a few things. First off, the idea of sea travel, travel in
Yeah,
general. Um, the sub was the sort of centerpiece. There had been a design for a sub that was basically a metal tube that they were starting to test and figure out. But of course, the general public, that was that was you may as well go to space. We've
mm,
actually explored space probably as much still as we have the deep sea and the ocean now. We're just now starting to get some deep sea, bathyspheres and things that can go down
mm.
and explore it. So can you imagine? In the 1800s, it was exotic, and now there's television shows where you can put a GoPro on your helmet, and you can literally rent something and go where these things are taking you in science fiction. That's
Yeah,
amazing. I saw a thing recently where, just to think of the compression in such a weird way, the Wright brothers flying, and then what was it, 50 or 60 years later, we're on the moon.
yeah,
So that compression. Now, this was exotic science fiction, and that's what Jules Verne, was known for. He and H.G. Wells were ahead of their time in imagining it. But the mundane for us was super exotic in this. The idea of going to Antarctica and planting a flag, That was science
Yeah.
fiction. That was, you might as well have the moon. I mean,
Yeah.
an ice breaking, the Nautilus was heated. It had heating coils that could cut through the ice. I mean, we did not have that. It
Mm-mm.
had engines that, now we're like, oh yeah, it's turbine or turbo engine. It's like there were still three-masted sailboats back then. That's
Yeah.
kind of what he was sinking. And then the other thing is the transfer of information. Like the mundane now, you've got, your phone, which has the Library of Alexandria in it, and you can go and you can look at basically any, piece of information that you need, or you can contact someone right away. Well, that's mundane to us. Back then,
Yeah.
you go out to sea, you are not reachable for months,
Yeah.
or information doesn't travel quickly. You make a discovery, you need to go, you can't email it to someone, you can't take a picture of it and send it. You have to write it all down, then go for months to a port, write a book, find
Mm.
somebody to publish it, and then get it to people to get the information. So we take that for granted now, but the flow of
Yeah.
information, you couldn't even take a mugshot somewhere back then and try and get people with it. Now we're like, you seen this person?
Yeah.
You seen this fish? And it's like you couldn't take a picture. You had to draw the fish.
Yeah.
You had to draw the plants you found. We consider that a mundane thing now. Like, oh, I went out and took a picture of my plant. It's sick. Well, before you'd
Yeah.
have a scientist sit. There's a brilliant scene in the movie Master and Commander where he wants to go to the island and he sits and sketches the plants and the things that he sees so they can tell
Yeah.
somebody about it. So we shouldn't take that for granted. This is still science fiction because it is of its time, but we are living that dream of science fiction now. So what I would love is when someone listens to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in my take on it, you
Hmm.
kind of time travel, but I want you to feel the wonder that someone would have felt back then. That if you can be innocent again and go,
Mm.
yeah, it was a big deal. Like that's a giant fish, or we're under the ocean, like we're eating seaweed. We're traveling so fast in the Nautilus that we can go from Antarctica to Norway,
Mm.
and avoid storms.
Do you have like a clip that kind of captures that essence of kind of like the wonder and the newness and the adventure
Yeah,
of that?
absolutely. When you're building a world, I do have something. Let me show you that building an atmosphere and the sort of tension.
Mm.
Uh, let's take a listen to this. I'll set it up real quick.
Okay,
This is the
perfect.
one, and you'll probably remember this. This is when the Nautilus is supposedly this sea monster. And so
Okay.
Professor Aronnax, which is my character, was a Frenchman, was asked by the Americans to go on board a ship called the Abraham Lincoln. And he's hunting for this sea creature, and it is the Nautilus. So what I tried to do is I thought, okay, it's almost like Jaws. You have to, how do I build tension through sound? How do I
Mm.
create, through silence sometimes that tense feeling of they genuinely believed in sea monsters back then. Sea people would believe it. And at the opening of this piece, I used an audio montage, and the way that does is it compresses all the experiences of all the ships that it has sunk and the feeling that people had, the overall prevailing mood, the scope of it is in that. And audio does that really well because our ear is deeper than our eye. Like that's why you can listen to a radio show for 3 hours and not get tired. But if you watched like 3 hours of a movie, you're like, I need to rest. My eye, I'm tired.
Well,
You
our
know,
visual processing is takes up a lot of bandwidth for our
That's
brain.
right. That's right. And
So,
your ear can take deep concepts in and you can passively listen and it's still getting in there. And so audio montage, which was really perfected for audio fiction, was something I really wanted to play with. So I'll play this beginning where it shows the through montage the sort of mood of the time, the scope of what's happening, and how different characters felt about it in a compressed way, so that you
mm.
don't have just one scene and the next scene. It gives an overall mood. And I really worked a long time to create this montage, which is an assault sort of on your senses and builds that tension of like, ooh, something's going on. So we can take a
Yeah.
look.
A monster, born from the depths.
Shimmering under the water, like a black steel mountain,
like
moving under the
corpse
waves.
in the surf. Carved eyes, staring upward, like it had seen the devil himself.
Waters off Japan and the Indian Ocean. It's as if the thing has no master, no purpose, save to spread ruin and fear.
Something from the deep. And it doesn't leave survivors.
Captain swore he saw something.
Some call it a myth, a sailor's tale. But the bodies, the wreckage, they tell another story. Vernon Wells, Tom Konkle, David Beeler, and Paul Eiding. 20,000 leagues under the sea. My name is Pierre Aronnax.
And see, there,
Can we just say, I feel like we need to fade out from that. Like it was so intense. There
yeah,
was
you
so
gotta
much.
feel it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's everything coming together. You know, I was very influenced by John Barry for the music. Wanted some real depth in it, but that montage at the beginning sets a tone of it makes you feel anxious, I hope. You have the people floating in, like I would put them further away. You'd hear somebody talk
Hmm.
over here. There's a little echo. All the voices have some kind of processing on them. You hear like the SOS sound going out on Morse code. I tried to layer at any one time, there's about 24 tracks of sound happening in this.
That's awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
so it's a
I,
lot of moving parts.
I would love to, as someone who listened to this, um, I felt a few things, like because I had no idea what to expect, right? So that was some of it. So I I felt a little bit like I was hearing a trailer at the
Mm.
beginning.
Hmm.
Just because I thought it was just kind of going to jump into a book. That's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And so I kind of felt like I was kind of like processing listening to a trailer, except I
Yeah.
wasn't
It's almost
seeing
like a
it.
cold opening to a TV show too, where it
Yes,
sort of
yes, the
sets
same
up.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes. And I thought, okay, and I absolutely was. I was very discombobulated. I was like, I don't what's happening? I don't know where this is going. What's going to happen next? And then there's beautiful music, by the way. You've told me you wrote the music for this. It is gorgeous.
Thank you.
And I absolutely I'm a big film score person, as you know.
Yeah, me too.
So
I collect, we bond over that. I collect soundtracks. Like when other kids were buying, records, disco records or whatever their thing, it's like I would have like, oh, this is the soundtrack to that, I've got John Williams or whatever.
yep,
I've always been into it because I love how visual that music is, but I also love
yeah,
symphonic music. It turned
yeah,
me on to orchestral music earlier than most kids because I realized it could still speak to me, that it felt contemporary and alive. It wasn't just something that old people did, from 400 years ago. It was like John Williams and John Barry spoke to me in this way that you could see how it worked in a movie, but also I could like just listen to the music and feel like a hero or see a scene from the movie. You get that rush. And I've always wanted to do symphonic music like that. Of course, it's difficult.
Mm.
I play piano, and with recent advances in technology, you're able to, through a piano controller, there's this thing called like a M controller keyboard, which is
Oh,
like this
sure.
kind of thing. You plug
Hmm.
it in and you can get samples. You can get, really good digital
Yeah.
samples or whatever of French horns and things like that. And if you kind of understand how they play together, you can start doing chords and doing it. And I knew with that, I knew when I wanted the music to change to make a hole in the music so I could say the title, have these things, or
Hmm.
I wanted to change into then a little bit of tremolo and have like a violin come in to feel cold, underneath it
Yeah.
and go. So I was really manipulating everything, which was just a joy for this project because 20,000 Leagues needed that kind of um, moody, almost tragic, majestic sound to it.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I felt like it needed.
Dangerous
Yeah,
for
dangerous
sure.
and moody you'll notice the music through the whole thing rises and swells just like waves. Like that was my
Mm.
mandate. It's like it needs to da 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 because in my head you were thinking of this is the waves going up and down, and so it's got
Hmm.
to swell and ebb because he's there, and then there's that crushing depth that he's in of the mysteries. So you have the music feel like it's sort of oppressive, except when I want to have a call to adventure, and then I just blow it out. It would sound like a John Williams little cue.
Hmm.
And we can talk about that a little later about how I use it in some
Okay.
action and not. But yes, I'm glad you noticed that. And that audio montage at the beginning, literally, you can take chapters of a book where it's like, and then this ship got attacked, and this is how the people felt about it. Well, you can do that in 30 seconds by having the
Hmm.
voices float in and find the most evocative things. Now, I made up some of those phrases. Obviously, those are not all in the book because, again, 19th century book doesn't quite know about montages. But I would
Sure.
pick like this is how they would have felt about it, or this is how it would have been reported, or this kind of thing. And then you're right. It's sort of like a trailer grabber of the action that we need to know happen, but we don't want to just sit here and not meet the main characters or not meet anybody. It's like, okay, here's this mysterious thing that might be a sea monster attacking another boat. It's like, how do I do that in a more layered? And it also kind of sets the tone that you prefigured that you're going into a fever dream.
Yeah.
That you're going
Yeah.
into something that it's almost like you're descending into these depths. And I feel like films do that really well when they use a montage, like at the beginning of Lord of the Rings.
Mm.
There is that great montage that introduces how the ring was taken and Gollum, and then how Sauron's finger was cut off. All of that is a giant montage with voiceover.
Mm.
Literally, you could listen to it and get the story. The
Yeah.
visuals are beautiful, but you didn't need them. So
Yeah.
that really is the use of montage for the mood.
Yeah. One of the things that for friends of mine who aren't musicians,
Right.
I've
By the way,
asked
you're a
them.
musician. You
Oh,
play,
yes, yes.
yeah.
So I play the
Well,
oboe and the
yeah.
clarinet, and
Right.
yeah.
And you
So
teach, correct, right? You
yeah,
also
I
teach.
teach. I
What is your
teach.
company that you
So
teach?
Reed Pros.
Read Pros. Okay.
Yeah,
There you
selling
go.
the little mouthpiece, which is the oboe reed,
Okay. You make
for
them.
that instrument. I make them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
sit here
awesome.
and
So
slave
you
away
know
whittling
music.
over.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you've played in orchestras as well, and
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah.
so you're sensitive to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to my non-musician friends, I've asked them sometimes, oh, what do you feel about this score or something? And they, in some cases, are very oblivious to it, which I find
Right.
fascinating. I'm like, how do you not hear it? Like it's,
Right.
and there have been some movies where where there was purposefully no music. And that often created a weird experience for individuals who never really noticed that the music was there
Right.
underneath.
Right.
But then suddenly, when there was no music, it was very unsettling.
Right.
And they had said, "Gosh, it was so strange that there was no music, and
Right.
I didn't realize that it was so present."
Right.
So I like one of the things I was going to say is that I like that through this there isn't kind of an undertone constantly of music that's kind of coming in and out. That really isn't what's happening. There are very specific moments where you chose to put music.
Right.
Lots of other things were sound effects, which I loved so many of the sound effects. And it really did make a
Yeah.
huge difference. For one thing, one of the things I had discussed with you so we're going to tell everybody else about it now, is that you had you had just the right mix of sound effects, which
Right.
I was baffled by that because I was thinking, gosh, how did you not manage to have that be overwhelming
Yeah,
or to
it's
where
tough.
it was too there was too much
Right. They're
information.
writing each other and you get numb to
Yeah.
it or you can't understand what's going
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
That's
was
huge.
there any time that you've made a conscious decision to say, all right, so if there's voice, there can only be three additional sound effects, or was it anything like that?
It's all feeling, but I
Yeah.
would listen to it 40 or 50 times and I'd pace. I pace in front of it. Like I'll put it on and I pace, there's a groove in the carpet where I listen to it and I'm like, am I knowing that the line is there and I'm assuming I'm hearing it, or is it really there? And I'll lower 2 dBs on this track. Then I'll raise 1 dB on that. And I'll say, no, I missed this. Or that wave is like peaking. You can see red. I try and do everything about -9 on
Mm.
the meter because that's sort of a comfortable level. Digitally, it's not like the old days with tape where you could just like, now digitally it either clips off and goes or you literally just distort out and it just takes it right down. Like you'll see the waveform is like this, and then it looks like the Devil's Tower. It's like it's cut off at the top, and
Right,
you're
right.
done. And it sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And with modern mixing, dialogue is not prioritized sometimes in movies, and it's hard to hear it. We talked about the mix, where the sound effects or the explosions and the stuff make the dialogue almost secondary. But because I don't have the visuals to be a descriptor in it, you
Mm.
have to hear what they're saying. Where it's like, let's get the harpoons and get this squid. If you miss that, you're like, wow, this is a lot of sound. I wonder what they're doing.
Yeah.
You actually need to hear the dialogue. So I tried not to weary the ear though, because
Mm.
I think a lazy mix would be if I had just done wall-to-wall music beds under all the voiceover to manipulate your emotions, which is what music does really well. You said some of your friends don't notice it.
Hmm.
They don't notice it because it's part of the psychological warfare that a director has to do. It's always a psychological war with the audience. You're constantly saying, "Please look at this. Don't notice this, but let's have it affect you." If you watch any movie where they've taken the music out, like the throne room scene at the end of Star Wars, I don't know if have you ever
Hmm.
seen it without the music? It's
Maybe once or twice, yeah,
it's
where
on YouTube.
watching.
You've
Yeah.
got to watch it. Somebody took
Yeah.
out the music, and it's literally just all the cuts feel long. Everything, it's
Hmm.
like you just hear people, they turn, you hear coughing for the metal presentation, and
Sure,
then
sure.
it seems to, when you put the music on, when you put John Williams' score on it, the whole thing comes alive. The cuts seem twice as fast, and
Hmm.
you get this emotional rush of like, I want to metal. I feel like I blew up the Death Star. That's why that movie works. But yes, I listened to sections, and to not weary the ear, there was a section where I decided, okay, when they're in the ice sound, the sound of it scraping on the hull and crushing,
Mm.
that's such a visceral feeling that I don't want to have music. And I knew
Yeah.
the next scene with the squid was coming up where I did want it. So I thought, wouldn't it be more effective to
Hmm.
challenge myself to how do I do an action scene with tension and I can't use music? But the fact I didn't use music makes the next scene better because now your ear's not used to music and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with it. It has way more effect because you're like, oh, okay, now it's got this action score, and I think it made
Yeah.
that scene better.
Yeah.
Too many times in movies, you can Michael Bay it to the point that you become numb. And I think that's that threshold, that adrenaline threshold, or even the dopamine hit you get from something, your threshold goes up the more you're constantly doing it, the least effective it becomes at the
Mm.
end. Like often we're in a movie and you just by the end of the movie, you're like, okay, enough. I'm exhausted. And so I said, you know what? Let me just challenge myself to create some scenes that have music, some that don't, but then sometimes use the music as a transitional device.
Okay.
Where there's a line where Aronnax talks about we have to go on this adventure, and all of a sudden it becomes like Horatio Hornblower. It's like dun dun
I
dun dun
bet
dun 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 dun, dun,
I bet
and
you have a clip for that.
I have some music clip. Let's see here. Start.
At the urgent request of the United States government, I joined an expedition aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, a powerful frigate, outfitted to hunt and, if necessary, destroy this enigmatic terror of the seas. And so we sailed, the Abraham Lincoln and I at her bow, into the vast unknown, with two companions by my side. Conseil, my steadfast assistant, loyal as the tide itself, a man of few words, an unwavering trust, and Ned Land, the harpooner, a hunter of the great whales, fierce and fearless, eager to pit his skill against this leviathan from the deep. He called it his duty, but I knew there was something more, a restlessness, a need to prove himself against a force as primal as the ocean itself. And so, we found ourselves called to the sea to join the American expedition. It was a summons I could not refuse. To stand at the edge of knowledge, to stare into the unknown, how could I resist? Stories of a creature beyond reason, a monster that defied nature itself. Some said it was a leviathan, a creature of myth, reborn. But I saw it in something more, an enigma, a challenge, and perhaps a warning.
So you see there, it goes for you feel the rush that he must, like the music is almost his internal life, where it's like, how could I resist? Dun, 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 dun. And
Right.
then all of a sudden that sort of flute comes in where it's like about mystery all of a sudden. It's a huge mood change, but the music does all the heavy lifting
Mm.
because really just seconds go by in my performance where it's like, how could I resist? Dun, 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 dun. It's like mystery. And without the music, it will seem too abrupt, but the
Yeah.
music sort of leads us into it. Well, you know how effective that can be, like a solo over something feels intimate, which is
Oh,
him
yeah.
talking intimately about it. But the big orchestra is like your brain almost goes on the adventure. You can see the bow of the ship cutting through the water, and he's like, "How could I resist?" Everyone
Yeah.
wants to go to sea. There's a great line in Moby Dick where he says, "Set any man down a walking, and inevitably he will end up at the sea." You
Mm.
know, that it's about mystery and adventure and it's the unknown. So that was why musically I did that transition. And then you have that sort of mysterious thing under it. And I listened to other music pieces to kind of go, what what did I like? What I was listening to Debussy and a couple other things where I thought, it's like Afternoon of a Faun and different things
Yeah.
like that sort of mysterious sound. How
Which
do
I
I
hear
get
elements
from
of that in here
yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
it's
Yeah.
definitely in there.
But at the
So
same time, I hear Star Wars elements.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, well that's yeah, John Williams, I can't escape. He's one of
Yeah.
my favorite composers. I did the music on a thing called Safety Geeks, and that was an electronic score. I wasn't able to do this kind of thing back then because just the technology didn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
But um, I think it sets the tone, and it does it in such a quick way. I only think that something like this can work if you really have a command of what the music can do for you and what the sound can do, because those are like if it's a bow, those are the other quivers in your bow that
Yeah.
you can use to do it. Some people will do an audio piece and it's just a narrator and it works, like a book
Hmm.
on tape or whatever.
Right.
I've always had a little trouble with those though, because I always like to hear the character in my head, like a distinct voice. And so when I'm listening to an audio book, because
Mm.
it's the same voice doing every character, it takes me a little bit out of it. But also, I don't feel the passage of time the way I do in a book, because there's that shift of where you're going with the mood, or a background sound effect going from the crashing sea to the distant sound of a motor, on the Nautilus. You're not gonna get that with just a narrator, just a dry narration. So that was the challenge on creating something for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that the moods and the tone of it are set by all of the things in play. The total immersion in how do I take the original music, the sound effects, and then the performance as an actor. I'm working that monologue myself. Like I did that whole performance in one night. One night I was in the mood and I just sat down and did it. And usually it was the first take. I was really lucky. But once I get in character and I have that voice, and I was really nervous about doing a French accent because I've only ever done it for comedy, or it's outrageous voice. And I thought, well, how do I do it where it's realistic? And then I thought of 300 of all things. And the guy who narrates it, David Wyndham, I think his name is, he found a tone that let people in. He was like, I couldn't believe the Spartans, we all fought in that one night. And I said, when I get myself in that zone, performance wise, it flowed out of me, the whole hour and a half, because I do the most talking. And really that little piece right there is a perfect example of shifting the tone, but I introduce all the characters in that narration. You get a sense of everybody. I talk about Conceal and everyone in that one little clip.
Okay, okay, wait. So, as you know, I am a fan of Foley. I think Foley
Yeah.
is so fascinating. I'm always like, was that really, did they have to add that in? Was
Right.
that, genuinely what was happening in that moment? And of course, a lot of times they do actually add it in, even
Yeah.
if the footsteps are present, they just may not
Right.
be, kind of the right tone. They may not be loud enough. They may not be,
Right. You're not
any,
miking for it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
anything like that. So, okay. So I have to ask, when it came to the waves lapping, will you share what you did to create this sound?
There are tons of little tricks in this thing. I did do some live Foley because I couldn't find the kind of customized thing. Certainly not, an off-the-shelf thing where you just get sound effects because they tend to be very generic.
Yeah.
So with that, I did get, these Scrub Daddy sponges. They're called.
Yes.
So I got water in those and found a wet, almost in a like a little dish or bowl. You get these
Okay.
wet splashing that I could kind of move it along as I wanted to, because surprisingly, it's hard to find wet floppy feet on a metal cylinder, which is them walking around the Nautilus when they first get scooped out of the ocean. I was like, you know what? You'd hear them walking because of that. We all
Okay,
know
okay,
that
okay.
sound.
Wait. So
Yeah.
you had a scrub daddy, but all right. And you said
Wet.
metal. Did you use like a pan from the
Yeah,
kitchen?
just a regular
I love it.
skillet right under a mic like this, and
Yeah.
and then I doubled the track so that it sounded like multiple feet.
Okay.
And then I had a lot of fun. Like, since we're talking about it right now, I'll tell you the when the squid attacks,
Yeah.
I have these blinds, and I was like, what would the tentacle, like, they really wouldn't make a sound, the tentacles of a giant squid. But I was like, what sound could I have? And I found this sound right here of dragging my hands along it. You get this, and as I opened them, it's almost like flipping through playing cards. So I could play
Oh,
the sound of
wow.
it going. You'll hear that in the attack of the squid. So
Do
it
you
was like
have any
little
of the
things like
sound effects
that.
queued up
Well,
specifically? You may not. I don't know if you do,
I
but
I think well, yes, I could play the action scene, um, using sound effects, dialogue, and music. You want to hear that? This is
sure,
the
sure. And if
so
there's more that you remember from this, like specific other things happening, I would love to hear what you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it actually building tension and introducing Nemo. I also did some interesting tricks. I slowed down scuba equipment that and steam venting sounds. And every time Captain Nemo comes in, you'll have to listen. This is almost an Easter egg. He always has metallic footsteps before he speaks. So there's always
Oh.
this moment where I let it breathe for a minute, because the way I describe him is like all the air sometimes in the room breathes around him. That he in the Nautilus, he's this presence.
Mm.
It's a cathedral, that it's his place of worship in the sea, and he's sort of the king. So when we meet him, you have that building sound evoking. He's ominous, this tragic thing. But
Mm.
but I thought, okay, how do we give him a really cool opening? And so here is the scene.
Okay.
They think they're attacking, the Nautilus, as this sea monster at first. That's what they think. But of course, the scientists, the men of science, go, this is not. This is something man-made. It's horrifying. I don't understand it, but it's charging us. And the way the Nautilus would attack things is it would go up to ramming speed and ram into the wood hulls of the ships and sink them. It didn't need torpedoes. They didn't really have the concept of torpedoes back then. It was ramming speed. It had spines and it would cut into it. So once they get in the water, the professor and Conseil and Ned Land are drowning essentially, and the Nautilus pulls up, and this maw opens up, and some people come out and grab them and bring them in, and that's where we meet Nemo. So I'm going to play this little section that set the mood, and it's an introduction of Captain Nemo, and listen to all the sounds around him, even what I do with his voice. You can hear as they get closer to him, the echo on his voice slightly changes. You hear them walking along, but we'll play this section. But that's what's happening.
Okay.
Here we go. Mhm. Share this with you. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so here we go. So this is Nemo's introduction and the mood.
To be consumed.
You there, in the water, do not struggle.
Who? Who are you?
I am the master of this vessel. I am the guardian of an empire beneath the waves, a world where the laws of the surface have no place.
You rammed our ship!
The surface world? It imagines itself invincible. But down here, in the depths, it is my law that prevails.
Professor, where? Where are we being taken?
Rest now. Soon you will learn the true nature of my vessel and of the ocean that surrounds you.
We found ourselves in a dim chamber, the walls pressing close, the air heavy with a strange metallic taste. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, each droplet echoing as though it were the very heartbeat of the vessel. I looked at my companions and I saw the same haunted uncertainty in their eyes that I felt in my own heart. There was a faint light up ahead, cold, unnatural glow. It seemed to grow brighter, as if anticipating our approach.
Professor, this place, it feels as if we've left the world behind.
We have, Conseil. We're in a kingdom unlike any other. Hidden from human eyes, governed by forces we do not understand.
And you hear at the very end there, you hear the processed air and the doo-doo,
Yeah.
almost sonar-like thing and things. And what's really fun about this is that's using audio to make you feel like, wow, we were out in the water and wet, and then we walked in and you kind of feel cold. And then
Yeah.
you feel like, and you notice even as a writer, 2 months ago when I was writing it, I thought the drip was like the heartbeat. And I made sure that there was a drip on one channel off to the side that you feel a little wet and cold hearing it. And then I reference it in the voiceover. So it all feels designed. It all feels like all the senses are at play. I think when you're doing good writing, it is anticipating these other things that you can world build with. So I knew that drip of water would just make you feel like, when you come your wet clothes and you're getting in something and now you're in this metal
Yeah.
ship that's cold and you're walking and just that little drip kind of made you feel like it. And
Yeah.
that's why I even reference it in the voiceover because I then made it metaphorical. It's the heartbeat of the Nautilus.
I definitely listening to that because I've had this experience a number of times where like the somehow you're walking outside, it's been raining, and you manage to get water in your shoe and just
Yeah.
the complete and total uncomfortable that's just how
Yes.
uncomfortable that is,
Yes.
of that
That
small amount of
squishy, yeah,
water in your
yeah.
shoe and your foot's cold and it's wet and you're just now you're just so unhappy. So every time I hear the footsteps with the scrub daddy,
Yeah.
all I can think of is that, because
Yeah.
I've definitely felt that before. So I know exactly what that is. And
Yeah.
it just takes me right back there immediately.
And something that evens all of that out, like if you're doing live Foley and stuff like that, just a little bit of reverb and a little bit of echo populates the whole thing. One way that I was able to take his performance from his house, my performance here, Paul on Zoom and Dave on Zoom, and make them all feel like they're in the same room is that
Mm.
little bit of reverb, that an equalization between all of them. You compress the sound a little bit. I use some compression in Adobe Audition. And then I always cut the dialogue first with no sound. I cut the dialogue at the speed I want everybody to talk and layer it. Then I output that dialogue track and drop it into Adobe Premiere. And that's where I then layer in all the music and the sound effects. So this little exercise of going from one place to another, I left holes where I knew this long I'm going to be hearing the room, this long I'm going to hear the drip, and this kind of stuff was all sort of mapped out. And then it feels like, the Scrub Daddy and all that stuff sounds real, like it's there because that also has reverb on it. It also
Oh,
has
yeah,
the
yeah.
drip. I put a little reverb on the drip. So it makes it all live, and it's justified because you're in a big metal sub. The Nautilus makes you sound a certain way. And interestingly, I thought I'm going to go against the grain because it makes sense. When they're talking among themselves and there's dialogue that's out, it's not in your head, there's echo and reverb. But when they think to themselves, unlike some projects where you hear and like the cue is always, well, if I'm thinking to myself, it has, I wonder if I left the oven on. And it always has some echo on it. Well, they're clean and dry. When you're in Aronnax's head, he never has echo. He never has reverb. It's like he's
Hmm.
whispering in your ear with no processing at all. And then when they're in the room, that's when the reverb and the echo comes in. And I kept that as the rule through the whole piece. So
So
if you,
do you feel like this then is this better experienced with headphones, or do you feel like it doesn't matter? Like it's
the biggest speakers you can play is the best way to experience. If you have a subwoofer, it's mixed for that. I'm listening to it right now. I have a three-way speakers where it's like a subwoofer and two really good computer speakers. I've mixed it for big, surround stereo speakers. Also, your car, it will sound really good in a car because the car's got that sort of dampening effect to it, and you can kind of
mm,
feel the whole thing. But yeah, the more bass you can have, it's a very different experience. I've certainly listened to it on a phone to hear what it would sound
right.
like, and it's all a very different experience. You're not going to have the immersion without feeling the bass and the midtones and all the, you're not hearing the echo the same way. But you
Yeah.
can certainly enjoy it on any platform. One thing that I like about it is with the technology, because audio podcasts are kind of back right now, by putting it up in one place, on Buzzsprout, I give a mix that I think will work everywhere, and then they disseminate it everywhere. Like they make sure it's on all the podcasting platforms at the right levels. It's on Spotify at the right level. It's on, Apple Podcasts, all the different ones where you can listen to something. It's on there. It's on Audible, on Amazon. All of those play at slightly different levels. They have their own compression, but the mix works on all of them. So,
Nice.
so for me, it breathes life into this world when you take the time to put that little drip or that little
Yeah.
footstep. I'm glad you appreciate Foley because,
Oh,
as an actor, when I'm in a movie, even if I grab somebody and pull them off to the side, even if they make rustling sounds on set when we're doing it, I've always seen them add like there's the sound of like cloth going and this and that.
Yes.
My friend Trip Brock has a place called Monkeyland, and he does that. He does, he'll do just what they call an M&E, which is just the music and effects, and it's enhanced over top of it. And it's funny when you're acting, like I acted in this episode of Bosch Legacy. And it's in a warehouse. It's busy with like a lot of people, and it's echoey and boomy. So I had to ADR my lines, that automatic dialogue replacement, redo
Right.
some of my lines. But also they had to like redo the sounds of machines and stuff going on, because you can't mic that and you can't be talking with all the echo and stuff. So our brains process it and believe it. Sound makes the picture better,
Oh yeah. Oh
more
yeah.
believable. Yeah.
What what is your what did you think is your kind of like your what's your favorite Foley effect that you did?
Oh my gosh. I think for me, the most fun I had was the squid stuff, because what's a squid sound like?
Yeah.
I started foleying the tentacles, then I tried to figure out like how the hits would be, like it's hitting the side of the ship, but then I thought, well, squids don't really make a noise, but this is, fiction. So I started slowing down animal sounds and the cries of animals and mixing them together. And with AI, you can really do some interesting stuff, because I could take two sounds and tell AI combine, the call of this bird and a cheetah, combine it and make that sound. You get this sound, and it's like,
How did it
wow,
go? How did it go again?
you know, should have just done it myself.
Sorry, I know it's
Yeah,
great.
but that's the cool, part of that. I think we should listen to that
Oh yeah,
scene.
do you have that?
I think I do. And that's one where I use music and sound effects and dialogue. It's coming out of the one I was telling you about, which is without it, which is in the ice. So this
Oh
is
yeah. Oh,
everything
I
at
love
play.
the ice, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah. We'll
Yeah.
play that one after this, and you can see where it's a totally different feeling, that the sound effects are driving it, and there's no music driving it.
Okay.
Here we go. Back to sharing. Okay, so this is the attack of the squid on the Nautilus, which is towards the end of our piece.
Okay.
There we go.
Are we under attack?
To the observation lounge, quickly. We're about to witness a sight few men have ever seen, and even fewer have survived to tell of.
Great. Just what I needed. Another chance to get killed, seeing something I never asked for.
What is that, Captain? That light?
It is a giant squid, the Kraken of legend.
Are you mad, man? That thing could crush the ship like an eggshell.
It's magnificent. I never dreamed I'd witness such a creature. Its arms, the way they move, like muscle and fury incarnate.
Not now, Professor.
The creature! It's circling us. Captain, what is your plan? Huh? Surely we cannot stay here
We
and...
will not flee. The Nautilus is strong enough to withstand any pressure, even the crushing embrace of a giant squid. If it attempts to grasp the hull, we'll have no choice but to fight.
It's trying to crush us. Captain, we need to break free.
The Nautilus will not be brought down by this monster. Prepare yourselves!
Damn it, man! If we don't get out of here, that thing's gonna tear this ship apart!
To the deck! We cannot fight it from within. To the arms room. Prepare the electric shocks along the hull. Activate the electric shocks. We will not be dragged down by any beast. Arm yourselves if you wish to survive.
Let's not let them go. The shocks. They're only making it angrier.
We fight it the old-fashioned way. Get me my harpoon. I'll take care of that beast myself.
So you
Ooh.
see.
Great music,
Yeah.
great music, I have to say. And I was so focused on listening to the sound of the creature that I didn't notice when the music snuck in.
Yeah, the music's been. It starts when he goes, "Are we under attack?" Dun dun dun
Yeah.
dun 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 dun.
Yeah, I was
And
so
you know
I was
what?
listening to all the things, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I realized all of a sudden I was like, hey, this is great music, and I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I missed when it came in. When did it come in?
Yeah, and it has all
So-
the little fluttering, like the all that stuff
Yeah,
happening. And
yeah.
the other thing you have to do as a director is you have to set the tone that the other people don't know this is what's in my head. So you'll notice I had to have everyone project, like, let's go, do this. Like good directing
Right.
tells people what to do. Like you can hear that mistake that sometimes people make where they're talking in a normal tone of voice, so they're doing this, and it's supposed to be an action scene. It's like you need to
Right.
project over all these layers, and when you're sitting here performing it, if someone doesn't give you that sort of direction of like, oh, you're going to have like a cacophony of sound, I need to project over that. So I had to 4 different ways. They were not talking to each other. They weren't all in the same room to get where they were. I had to
Right.
get Dave to project in this way. I had to get Vernon to project, myself, all these different things. So you have all that at play, like directing them in an action scene and keeping their energy up. And then I knew in my head, I was like, I'm going to shoot this, and I know I'm going to have like the crash of a wave. I'm going to have this and that. And then when you get in the edit bay, you start building that world like one little piece at a time, like a layer cake, until the overall effect is like, wow, I can kind of see them going out on the deck and this thing being out there and the waves crashing, and they're trying to electrify it and
Yeah.
get it to go back. And then finally I have Dave's character grab a harpoon and he's going to stab it and the whole thing. And for me, that was the exercise in this. The antithesis of this is building tension with silence and nothing. So I want to play at the beginning. This is when the Nautilus is sort of stalking them. And it's how you build tension through silence, the power of silence. I'll play this little section for you.
We've seen only the surface. Glimpse of it. Something vast. And it saw us. I'm sure of it. Studying us. Like we're the intruders here.
And perhaps we are. It is possible this thing has been here far longer than any of us. Watching. Waiting.
Do you think it'll come back?
Oh, it'll come back.
As the echoes of that sound drifted away, we were left in the emptiness of the sea, haunted by what we had glimpsed. There was no more creature, no wild beast. It was a presence, a power forged from sea and darkness. The air was thick with the scent of salt and iron, the promise of violence hanging like a fog. And in that silent moment, I wondered, had we found the unknown, or had it found us?
So you can see there, you almost don't notice it, but no sound at all. By the time I'm talking about silence, even the lapping of the wave goes away, which is
Yes,
artificial.
I did notice that. Yes.
Yeah, it's artificial, but it works for the story because he's talking about that, and I wanted you to feel it.
Well,
Like
yeah.
you feel empty for a minute. You're like, whoa. And it is
Yeah.
like that. I've been out at the sea, in the middle of the night. And when you're floating out there, there's a quietness when the water is like glass and it's still, it
Hmm.
soaks up all the sound. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way for me to capture that. And what a
Hmm.
great way to build tension. You don't need the dun 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 under this. You need that silence of like, I'm feeling anxious, like there's something out there.
Yeah.
And then the music creeps in after you get it. And I call it earning it. You've earned the pause. You have a
Yeah.
pause in there of quiet, and then you go out. And that dovetails perfectly into this is the tension, but without music. This is them going to the Antarctic, and I wanted you to feel pressure and cold. So you can, now that you have the mood there, it's like, I'm like,
Hmm.
Tanya, you're there. Now imagine sound takes you all of a sudden to, this should be a completely different feeling. That
Okay.
informed my performance as a performer. You notice I got quieter and breathier, and I was
Mm.
evoking like what it would be like to have someone whispering to you and you're both feeling tense. Well, now this is a different kind of tension. It's that pressure of hearing the sound of the ice.
Drew, we need to find a place where the ice is weaker. A place where we can ascend safely.
I have already considered that, Professor. I will find another path. We will find the surface, or we will carve our way to it.
We're still in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but ice.
Professor, that man who spoke of science and wonder is not the same man I see now. There is something heavy in his gaze, as if he bears a burden that grows with every fathom.
He's lost, Conceal. Lost in his own damned obsessions. Control. Purity. The sea. Running from something he can't face, and it's dragging us down with him. If we surface, we need to find a way to get off this thing while we can.
In the South Pole? Where will we go? We must tread carefully, Ned. Captain Nemo is not a man to be provoked lightly. Do not do it.
Getting our things from our cabin.
We are suspended between life and death. The air thinning with each passing second. Around us, the ice held firm, like a fist ready to crush its prey. And at the helm, Captain Nemo stood unmoved, calculating, planning our escape.
Increase ballast pressure. All tanks at maximum. We will rise until the ice begins to give.
Do you feel that? We were pushing upwards, but the ice, it's too thick. How will we be?
He's using the Nautilus like a chisel, pressing against the ice, forcing it to yield. But it may not be enough.
We'll heat the outer hull. The water will warm, and the ice will weaken. We don't need to shatter it. Just enough to break free.
This isn't working.
It's not going to work.
Wait! The heat, radiating from the hull, is melting a path where none existed.
Come on. Come on.
You can feel that tension. No music.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the soundtrack is the differences in the ice, and I added the sound of I found this sound, it's like a compression sound. It's almost like a can, a metal tense can being squeezed or something. And
Uh-huh.
I slowed it down a little bit, and then I put some echo on it so it sounds more like the hull of a submarine. And you get that.
Right.
And actually, if you're listening with headphones, it compresses the sound as if
Right.
you're
Right.
being compressed going in that, which I thought was really nice. And then I have an engine start that I slowed down, and I did a thing which they call it a distortion whirl. It's a plugin on um, Audition where you would hit it and it does this sort of vortexing kind of thing. So it sounds like a motor straining. So I would
Yeah.
fade that in as they're going where he's trying to guide through. So it sounds like you're almost drilling through. It's like a drill. It's almost like a dentist drill, but slowed way down. So it gave the impression. You notice how he says he's using it as a chisel to get through
Right.
the ice. I thought, well,
Right.
that's evocative because we're familiar with that sound. it doesn't, you don't think of a submarine having that sound, but yes, it would have a propeller, it would have some kind of propulsion. So that's what was at play in that.
Wow. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. What did you create the ice sound, or was that one that you had to find somewhere?
That I found, I did a lot of research. I have a couple of drives. I've been collecting because I now do these shows. I've been collecting sounds as I find them, from
Yeah.
libraries. I belong to Envato, which is another thing. If you have a membership, you can kind of try and find it. And I found basically an ice sound. It wasn't that particular one exactly because that I had to process and slow down and add the sort of reverb to make it feel like it lived in there. Because the sound of ice, it was more just ice cracking like you're ice fishing. But I
Yeah.
knew in my head I could get us there. And so it's actually looped. So you're feeling it as if you're sliding through the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that, kudos to the internet. You can have this vast library of stuff. You'll find it somewhere that somebody has, so
I
you
love
can
it.
reprocess it and use it.
Oh, yeah. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. Um, let's see here. So I would I would want to know, I guess maybe did you have a scene maybe that was your favorite, or like a section that was your favorite,
Hmm.
and why?
I have a lot of favorites. I love his speeches as Nemo because we get to know his motivation. Like he goes from being this sort of villain to a tragic figure. He is ultimately someone who's a type of environmentalist. He's been hurt and isolated from the world, and his own hubris is bringing him down. Um, Narcissism and the inevitable corruption that putting yourself at the center of everything brings. I,
Yeah.
I think some of those scenes I'm most proud of bringing that out of Vernon because I know he wanted to play this character so much, and that's where, in speaking his mind and making us feel for him, I think that's where we really get to know him.
Mm.
As a performer, I loved doing Aronnax where I would do the asides with Conceal, where he's like, "Do you remember why you're doing this? You're becoming like him." No, I'm not. And then eventually these conversations with him do change me to where I'm like, this is ridiculous. We need to get to the surface. We have to leave immediately. And so for me, it was different challenges. I loved performing that and creating, evoking, I love those long passages where I could evoke a mood and talk about the characters and my internal life and that kind of stuff. But I think I had the most fun getting him to do the performance that I know he wanted to do as
Yeah.
Nemo. I could certainly find a section of his dialogue from that I'm really proud of if you want to hear something from that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, here, I don't have that queued up. That's a great question, but I hadn't addressed that. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you want to just ask a couple more questions and we got it. What do you
Sure.
think?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
A freedom you may never understand.
Let's see.
Well, I for one have had enough.
In this world,
A life without the sky.
they are made to endure, considered a divine right to pillage and plunder.
Yeah.
Of the lives you've taken.
Okay.
It is a world apart from men.
Okay. So, let me set it up.
Yep.
Is it visible? Is it
Yeah.
still?
Yeah. I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm really proud of how he created the character of Nemo. That's one of the reasons I really want people to seek this out and listen to it, is you have an actor who's doing something they really want to do and they really believe in.
Yeah.
And I just sort of turned him loose. When I wrote this piece, I was like, how do we take an idea that could be dry, or it's like we should be good to the ocean and people are abusing, the environment and this kind of thing. It's like I didn't want that heavy message, but I wanted him to articulate it in a way that had emotion behind it, so you feel something. It's about something. So here's a little section of that thing that I wrote that Vernon Wells did a great job.
Thriving on the ocean's indifference.
So, this is where you gather your treasures, Cap. Gold, relics, and wreckage. Things claimed by the sea, never to be seen by anyone else.
Not treasures, Mr. Land. These are reminders. To you, they are things. But to the ocean, they are nothing more than matter to be reshaped and reclaimed. Consider this, Mr. Land. What you value more, your so-called freedom or your survival?
And what of the lives you've taken? The ships you've destroyed? Are we supposed to believe that you've somehow made yourself a judge over the rest of us? If that's your freedom, I don't want it.
Perhaps, Mr. Land, it is you who have forgotten what it means to be free. You long for the surface, yet the surface world made you a slave to its whims. If this is a cage, then it is a cage that men like you will never understand. I am bound only by the depths of my own conviction, and that is a weight I carry gladly. You call yourselves the pinnacle of creation, masters of the earth itself, as if granted a divine right to pillage and plunder. Nations rise and fall, but the disease remains carried in the hearts of men, a plague with no cure. I have seen the earth scarred and barren, bled dry by the avarice of kings and merchants alike, defiled by the ceaseless hunger. This is the world you call civilization. Blinded by gold, deafened by engines, you cannot hear the earth's cry. Beneath your cities, beneath every border drawn in blood and smoke, the soil bears witness to each drop spilled. You speak of progress, yet build empires upon bones, knowing only how to take, to strip the world bare until there is nothing left but ash. And when the last drop of life has been wrung from the land, you will turn to the sea, as you have every corner of this world, seeing it only as a resource to exploit. When your greed and wars leave you gasping for salvation, I shall let the world above wither, the waves closing upon its ruins like a shroud. For I have seen the truth. Mankind does not deserve the world it has inherited. And I shall be its last witness.
Yeah. So you see, we found the levels there where he almost loses it. You can see him like spitting the words out, and then he
you can feel that too.
Yeah, and then he gathers himself, and he's like, "This is what I'm going to do, and I shall be its last witness." He brings it back, and then there's a wonderful beat where I had him wait and then become cheery again because he's a little bit crazy. He's like, "Professor Aronnax, I have something I want to show you," and it's sort of like. Whoa! We see he just lifted the veil for a second. Like, well, what's the steam that drives the engine? Oh, he's got bitterness. And I tried to make that flowery language work because it's like borders drawn in smoke and blood and these things, they're all great analogies for what's happening even now. Where we we'll go in and just basically just strip mine something or whatever, and we're fighting over these resources and things without any thought about it. And he's saying, all the noise that we're making, all this chaos that we've created, we can't hear the earth's cry. And I really like that about his character, and I think he really nailed it. That's not his usual bag of tricks. He used to be, when he played a villain, it was his physicality that made him imposing on screen. But here it's all in the voice and the emotion and the vulnerability and the indignation that he had. And he brought my words to life. So I'm really proud of that scene.
Nice. Oh, yeah, it's good. That's good stuff. So if Jules Verne could hear your adaptation, what do you think he'd say?
How did you record this? How am I hearing this would be his first thing.
Yeah.
Um,
What?
it's like the old joke, if Abraham Lincoln were alive today, what would he be doing? Well, he'd be pounding on the coffin like crazy, you know. Um, but I think if Jules Verne heard this, I would hope in my imagining as a fellow creative person that he would say, "Wow, my idea sustained for 150
Mm,
years later. There are still things that people are finding in it that are
yeah.
entertaining and useful. That although technology has far exceeded even what I considered science fiction, I would hope that Jules Verne realized that in another language, I mean, this was written in French. So he would say, in another language, you found a voice, my voice, and made it your own.
Mm,
And I feel like that's great art, is that it can still speak. It's a time capsule in a weird way.
yeah.
He's achieved
Yeah.
immortality.
Yeah. What greater compliment could there
Yeah.
be than the fact that your work continues
Yeah.
to live on and have relevance and is appreciated for
Yeah.
sure.
Think of all the things written that we're not recording and talking about 150 years later.
Yeah.
What a testament that this particular thing spoke to enough people, including me, that Vernon said it was his bucket list, and I said, you know what? I've always wanted to take it on, and I was intimidated because of the story, and then I had to find my own take to it, and I think that if he heard it, he would realize that I was honoring it, but that it was enough of a cool universal myth
Mm,
that I could be telling it now and it would still be entertaining.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would be your dream project? Is there a classic story that you would really love to do?
Wow. As an audio piece,
Yeah, we'll
um,
say as an audio piece since we're talking about this being a
okay,
yeah.
because there's some movies.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of movies. Um, I would love to make. I think more two things actually. I would like to do the ultimate ambitious sort of comedy piece, almost like my own Doctor Strangelove or my own Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where I take on something and create something that is sonically ambitious and funny. I also would like to try something like The Time Machine or Treasure Island, where there have been versions of it, some very good, like the George Powell version of Time Machine, and the 50s version of Treasure Island's quite good. There's even one with Charlton Heston that is Fraser Heston directed. It was a TV movie that was very good. But definitive on audio, I don't think so.
Mm,
So I'd love to take on some more classics. I think that would be my dream projects would be to do versions that people really enjoyed, that felt immersed in, that I always go, like, what was it that was good that people liked about this? Like, why are we still, what is it about this? What speaks to me? Why am I a fan? Why do I like it? Or what can I say? And then you honor their creation. You don't just use it as your canvas to do whatever, but you go, how do I evoke what they were doing with this story? So that would be my dream, is to create
mm.
classics and then to do my one original comic piece. And I got close. I'm very silly when I do original stuff. It's funny. My podcast channel is schizophrenic, which is good and bad for marketing because people are like, I listened to 20,000
Descriptor.
Leagues, and the next thing was the Sherlock Holmes and the Exploding Puddings, and both of them have all this stuff, And Exploding Puddings is a very ambitious Sherlock Holmes mystery. It just is very silly, and it was inspired by the Goon Show and Monty Python, who used sound for comedy brilliantly. And I was like, how can I do that?
Mm,
So if you listen to, Sherlock Holmes and the Exploding Christmas Puddings, or if you listen to the Hairy-Handed Hitchhiker, I'm deploying all the same techniques that I use in a drama or something like this, but comedically. So I feel like there's a few more in me, that I could do that would be dense and immersive, but at the same time wonderfully silly, and use the imagination that you can create with audio fiction, where you can literally jump from one strange concept to another very easily. And what I like about audio fiction is I don't have to wait and try and get a budget, to make it like a movie. It took me years to get them, troubles my business together to do a film noir. but if I want to do a film noir on this, which actually is a very good idea, I could do it and not have to worry about raising millions of dollars to do it.
Fantastic. What about so for listeners who haven't yet heard the full 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that you've adapted here, where are all the places that they could find this?
Okay, there's a lot of places.
There's a
you can see
list.
it. Yeah, there's a list. You can see this. It's part of the Radio Reborn podcast. You can listen to this on Buzzsprout. You can listen to it on Podbean. You can listen to it on Audible. You can listen to it on Spotify. You can listen to it on YouTube. You can listen to Apple Podcasts. If you search for Radio Reborn and the platform that you might want to hear it on, it's there. If you want to encourage and back us, you can buy me a coffee, which is a website you can go on and send some money my way, which is lovely. Also, you can support it by going to the Barnes and Noble website, where for $3 you can download it as an audiobook, and you can certainly let me know, what you thought of it by writing reviews, which are very important. It's nice to get feedback and get it out there.
Yeah.
Leaving comments and if you can post it, retweet it, or exit or whatever they call it, and put it on Facebook and all those places. Anywhere that you can listen to a podcast, it's there, under Radio Reborn, 20,000 Leagues.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for visiting with me, Tom.
Absolutely.
So I'm your host, Tanya, and this is Tom Konkle. This has been another episode of Deep Dive. Thanks for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you. Wonderful to talk to you about it.